Hi, I'm Dr. Perla Sneh, speaking to you from Argentina. Khurbn Yiddish, Khurbn Forschung, Unveiling the Absent Absence. We all have seen that image of the Warsaw Ghetto. A Jewish boy of about 8 or 9 years old walks his hands up among a group of Jews who, in Nazi words, were forcibly taken out of the bunker. The picture is included in the album that Jürgen Stroop prepared in praise of the destruction of Jewish Warsaw. He titled it, There is no longer a Jewish quarter in Warsaw. We know that image from Nuit et Brouillard, the film by Alain René. We have seen it in many books, even on the cover of various psychoanalytic journals. There, the child appears enlarged in the center of the image, while other figures are excluded, starting with the Nazis who point their rifles at the Jews. Among them is Joseph Bloche, a particularly cruel guard nicknamed Frankenstein. The child, to whom Dan Porat dedicated a very interesting study, has become an icon of the Holocaust, an icon, that is, an abstract symbol. The way in which the image becomes an icon is perhaps due to the illusion of authenticity that leads us to assume that an image shows what the words hide. However, the image, a shroud of lights and shadows, fails. No doubt it fails, because the photo, without its context, has become mute and makes us forget that we are adopting the gaze of the murderer. This photo shows what the Nazi sees, such an absolute enemy that he could even be a small child. But if we go over the image carefully, we see that there are other children in the scene. A little further back, in the center, to the right of our little boy, another child looks fearfully to the side. Then, to his right, we can see a little girl looking directly at the camera, her eyes wide open, as if petrified. And even further, towards the back of the scene, blurred between heavy adult bodies, the diffuse face of another little girl appears, also looking directly at the camera. And if we look even closer, we can see that she is sticking her tongue out at the camera. Let me put it this way. That tongue is Yiddish. It is time for us to look at what we have seen so many times, but now from a new perspective, that of which was left aside. Then the scene becomes new, unprecedented. Yiddish, unbedingt Yiddish, Yiddish, without fail Yiddish. I want to speak the language of the people that the accused try to exterminate along with their language, proclaims Abraham Sutzkever, poet and partisan from Vilnius, declaring his desire to testify in Yiddish in Nuremberg. It was not meant to be. As we all know, Yiddish was also not an official language either in the Eichmann trial or in the Auschwitz trial in Frankfurt. But the fact that Yiddish did not occupy an official place in the trials does not mean that it was absent. We must pay attention to the condition of its presence to understand the place it occupies. When the first witness in the Eichmann trial was authorized by the judges to testify in Yiddish, in the words of Douglas Lawrence, its resonance erased the distance between the globalized audience and those killed by the final solution. Reinstating Yiddish in our meditations requires carefully approaching what other languages keep at a safe distance, because the victims, the vast majority of them, spoke and lived in Yiddish. They lived, they died, they fought, they killed, they cursed, they resisted, they surrendered, they despaired, they created, all in Yiddish. Hence, it is urgent to read with Yiddish eyes what we have seen so many times. We must recover what lies encrypted in the Yiddish world, although, it must be said, it is not simply a linguistic approach what is at stake here, even if such an approach is necessary. Our object of study is deployed in an interdisciplinary field that seeks to investigate the cultural, literary, artistic, ideological, and political processes of multiple rich and extensive cultural traditions, as well as the annihilation processes that destroy them. That is why at the IVO, the Yiddischer Wissenschaftlicher Institut in Buenos Aires, the largest archive and study center on Yiddish in Latin America, we are opening the Khurbn Forschung Center beim IVO unter dem Namen Rochel Auerbach, the Khurbn Research Center at the IVO in the name of Rachel Auerbach, sponsored by the Center for Genocide Studies and the UNESCO program and chair in cultural diversity, both at the university, the National University of 3 de Febrero. We propose a path of rereading and re-elaboration from a renewed perspective, that of returning to the original sources traversed by contemporary history in the various countries where Yiddish flourished. In my case, as I said, Argentina, a place of enormous effervescence of that culture. Among our objectives, there is also to create in Spanish a corpus of texts arising from the literary, historical, and epistolary records in the Yiddish language during annihilation. And I underline in Spanish because sometimes people forget that English is not the only language spoken in academic fields. We intend to open a path for Yiddish as a language inserted in an historical process that had a catastrophic effect on it, a process that destroyed the majority of its speakers to the point that there are linguists who speak about linguicide. Even so, and against all odds, Yiddish persisted, making it possible not to resume the traces that the annihilation left in it. Yiddish literature was the earliest manifestation of what later came to be called Holocaust literature. It was also the language that provided the first and spontaneous name given to the destruction, Khurbn, a designation that we must reinstate in our elaborations. Also in Yiddish were born the today called Holocaust studies, at the time called Khurbnforschung, where we can find materials that only many years later were incorporated as a novelty in the academic field. For instance, the excellent book Golden Harvest, in Polish Złote Żniwo, by historians Janty Gross and Irena Grudzińska-Gross, which reveals in 2011 what Mordechai Zanning already described in 1952 in his Dos Gold Rush, The Gold Rush. On the other hand, anyone familiar with Yiddish poetic lyrics cannot ignore that the consideration of the Yiddish writing of the Khurbn as a corpus, with its undeniable poetry during Auschwitz, could have given a completely different turn to the discussion on Adorno's famous saying. Sutzkever invocation of Yiddish, unbedingt Yiddish, which we make our own, is not a mere linguistic choice, but a political, existential statement. We need to address the power of the Yiddish word in the heart of the Khurbn, a word suppressed from canonical studies, perhaps due to its uncanny power to actualize a terrible experience and undermine a widespread illusion among researchers, that of an abstract conceptualization of horror. By contrast, Yiddish in the Khurbn was anything but abstract. Yet, such powerful speech is rarely considered something else than a kind of ritual artifact, the paradigmatic example of which is Hirsch Glick's partisanary hymn. His words, Mir seinen da, here we are as present in Jewish commemoration days as Celan's Black Milk of Dawn are in German commemoration ceremonies. But that's it. The presence of Itzhak Katzenelson in the Jewish Combat Organization as resident poet, or Gebirtig songs as a password for clandestine organizations, points us in other directions. Katzenelson and Sutzheber are just two of the many names that give way to a new alternative consideration, that of a forgotten and powerful rhetoric that provides not only a discourse of memory, but a way of resistance and endurance. Thank you very much for listening.